That night, I invited a few friends over to my house for a sleepover. We had planned it for days, looking forward to staying up late, eating pizza, and just having a good time. As soon as they arrived, we set up the living room, spreading mattresses across the floor and grabbing every blanket and pillow we could find. It felt like the perfect setup for an unforgettable night. We started by playing video games, challenging each other and laughing so hard that my stomach hurt. By midnight, the pizza arrived, and we devoured it, barely pausing between bites as we kept our game going. The hours seemed to fly by. None of us even realized how late it was. Eventually, as the clock crept toward 2 a.m., the excitement began to wear off, and we all started to feel the weight of exhaustion. One by one, we began to settle down. Some of us stretched out on the mattresses on the floor, while others claimed spots on the sofas. The chatter faded as everyone drifted into sleep, leaving the house wrapped in silence. I remember lying there, thinking about how fun the night had been, feeling that warm, relaxed drowsiness that only comes after hours of laughter and good company. Little did I know that this night was about to take a dark, unforgettable turn. I woke up in the middle of the night with my mouth feeling dry as sandpaper. My mind was still foggy with sleep, but the thirst was enough to push me out of the warmth of my blankets. Carefully, I sat up, trying not to disturb anyone. The house was blanketed in silence, with only the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the windows, casting strange shadows across the walls. Not wanting to wake my friends, I tiptoed through the darkened room, making my way toward the kitchen. The whole house felt still, as if it were holding its breath. My footsteps sounded louder than usual on the floor, echoing through the empty spaces. A strange chill crept up my spine, but I brushed it off, blaming the eerie silence in my half-awake state. As I reached the hallway leading to the kitchen, the darkness seemed to deepen. I blinked, adjusting to the lack of light, my eyes straining to see through the shadows. The usual comfort of my own home felt oddly distant, like I was walking through a stranger's house. I shook my head, trying to snap myself out of it. It was just the middle of the night, I told myself, nothing more. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me, and continued my quiet walk toward the kitchen, unaware of the terror that was waiting just a few steps ahead. As I reached the edge of the kitchen, I froze, my entire body locking in place as a wave of terror crashed over me. Just a few feet ahead, in the darkness of the hallway, stood a figure. No, a creature. It was towering, impossibly tall and impossibly thin, with skin that seemed to drink in every bit of light, making it appear like a shadow brought to life. But the worst part was its eyes. Two large, burning red orbs that gleamed in the darkness, piercing right through me. The creature's head was tilted down as if to avoid brushing against the ceiling, its lanky, unnatural form hunched in a way that seemed almost deliberate, like it was trying to fit into a space it didn't belong. Those glowing red eyes locked onto mine, and a chill colder than anything I'd ever felt ran through my veins. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was completely paralyzed by the sight before me, unable to tear my gaze away. My mind raced, struggling to process what I was seeing, but there was no logic to cling to, no way to rationalize this nightmare standing in my own home. The sheer terror overwhelmed me, and I felt a warm, humiliating trickle down my leg. I had lost control, so consumed by fear that I hadn't even noticed. My legs shook and my heart pounded so violently that it drowned out everything else. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in that horrifying silent stare down at the creature, but then something in me snapped, and the primal urge to survive took over. Without thinking, I turned and bolted back toward the living room, sheer panic taking over every movement. I was screaming before I even realized it, my voice tearing through the silence and waking up my friends. I stumbled into the room, breathless, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I tried to form the words to explain what I'd just seen. My friends sat up, rubbing their eyes, still drowsy and confused, trying to process my terrified rambling. There's something in the hallway, I gasped, struggling to catch my breath as I pointed back toward the corridor. It's tall and its eyes, red eyes. My words felt weak compared to the horror I'd just experienced, but they were all I could manage. My friends looked at each other, concern flickering on their faces, but they were still clearly doubtful, half awake and half convinced I was imagining things. Reluctantly, they got up, one of them grabbing his phone to use as a flashlight. Together, they shuffled toward the hallway, flipping on the lights as they went. The warm, steady glow filled the corridor, revealing nothing but the usual shadows cast by the furniture and walls. No creature, no red eyes, nothing. I stood back, watching from the edge of the room, my heart still racing, desperately trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. One of my friends turned back to me, raising an eyebrow. "Are you sure you didn't just have a nightmare?" he asked, his tone half skeptical, half concerned. But I knew it wasn't a dream. The memory of those eyes, the chilling presence of that creature was burned into my mind. Yet, with no trace left behind, I could see the doubt starting to settle over everyone's expressions, even my own. After that night, I couldn't escape the image of that creature. No matter how hard I tried to push it away, the memory of those glowing red eyes haunted me every time I closed my eyes. It felt like the creature was still watching me, lurking just out of sight, ready to return. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and the terror it caused wouldn't let go. The nightmares came almost every night, vivid and relentless, making it impossible to get any real rest. The fear began to take over my life. I started avoiding dark places, even the hallways in my own home. I couldn't be alone in the dark anymore, and I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, expecting to see those red eyes again. My friends tried to reassure me, telling me I had just imagined it, but the fear was too real for me to believe that. I knew what I saw, but the doubt crept in. Was it a hallucination? A nightmare I hadn't woken from? Eventually, I had to admit that the trauma was too much to handle on my own. I sought help from a psychiatrist, hoping to make sense of the chaos in my mind. We talked about the nightmares, the fear, and the overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. The psychiatrist suggested it was a result of stress and anxiety, but no matter how much therapy I went through, the fear remained. The creature, the red eyes, the feeling of being watched, it never stopped tormenting me. Even with treatment, the question still lingers in my mind. Was it real, or did my mind create it out of fear and exhaustion? I come from a family where the supernatural isn't just a topic of conversation, it's a reality. Many of my relatives have had their share of strange experiences. Some are sensitive to spirits, and one of my uncles is even a medium. But I've always kept my distance from that side of things. I wanted a normal, simple life, one free of shadows and whispers from the beyond. I never sought any connection to the paranormal. Yet, peace is something I've never really known. Since I was young, there were voices, faint whispers that would come out of nowhere, interrupting my sleep and sometimes my everyday life. I'd feel a cold murmur close to my ear, like something was trying to get my attention, but when I'd look around, no one was ever there. And then there were the headaches, constant and relentless, like a heavy weight pressing down on the back of my neck. I went to countless doctors hoping for a diagnosis and an explanation, but they always shrugged it off, finding nothing wrong with me. Despite my reluctance, a part of me suspected that these experiences weren't random. I believed they came from something beyond, something I wanted no part of. But no matter how hard I tried to shut it out, to pretend it wasn't real, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow trapped. It was as if this dark, unseen presence followed me, haunting the edges of my life, refusing to let go. I had no choice but to carry on, trying to ignore what felt like an invisible shadow clinging to me. One night, I had a dream so vivid and disturbing that it felt more like an intrusion than a dream. In it, I found myself on the scene of a horrible car accident. Twisted metal, broken glass, people lying injured across the road. There were victims everywhere, their faces twisted in pain and shock. But what struck me the most, what left me with a bone-deep chill, was that spirits were there too, hovering over the wounded, tending to them in a way I couldn't fully understand. They moved with a strange purpose, as if they knew what they were doing, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The dream felt too real, too clear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some figment of my imagination. Something about it seemed purposeful, almost like a warning. I sat up in bed, frozen with a sense of dread, wondering what I was supposed to do with what I'd seen. But there were no answers, no clear message, only an eerie unease that seemed to linger long after the dream faded. As the morning crept in, I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, nothing more. but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else, something darker, as though the dream was a glimpse of something beyond my control. There was a heaviness in my chest, a sense that something was about to happen and that somehow I was connected to it. Trying to shake the feeling, I forced myself to go about my routine, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But even as I tried to push the thoughts aside, the unease lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering dread as I went into the kitchen to make some coffee. As I sat down with my mug, my dog walked over and sat right in front of me. At first, I didn't think much of it until I noticed the way he was staring at me. His gaze was intense, unwavering, like he was looking through me or at something just behind me. It was so unusual that I felt a chill run down my spine. For a moment, we just stared at each other. His eyes were wide and focused, almost as if he were trying to tell me something or warning me of something I couldn't see. The silence in the room felt heavy, and a strange sense of alertness took over me. My mind flashed back to the dream, those spirits hovering over the injured people, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The thought crept into my mind, uninvited. Did someone die? It felt absurd, but the feeling was so strong that I couldn't ignore it. My dog was still staring, unblinking, and it made me feel as if he somehow knew more than I did. I wanted to shake it off as just my imagination, but his behavior was too eerie, too purposeful to ignore. I reached down to pet him, hoping to break the tension, but he didn't respond like he usually would. Instead, he just kept his eyes fixed on me, silent and still. That's when I realized that whatever I had dreamed of the night before might not have been just a dream. Hoping to clear my mind, I decided to go for a run on the trail near my house. The fresh air and exercise usually help me shake off any lingering tension. But as I approached the trail, I noticed a section cordoned off with caution tape, police lights flashing nearby. A crowd had gathered, murmuring in hushed voices, and I felt an inexplicable dread creep over me. Drawing closer, I saw the wreckage, a car crumpled and mangled that had clearly rolled over multiple times, coming to rest against a cluster of trees. The vehicle was in pieces, barely recognizable, its frame twisted and broken. But then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Despite the catastrophic state of the car, the driver's cabin was almost untouched. Somehow, the space around the driver was completely intact, as though protected by an invisible force. The onlookers whispered in shock, and someone said that the driver had walked away without a scratch. I could hardly process what I was seeing, but an uneasy familiarity washed over me. This was exactly what I'd seen in my dream. The violent accident, the strange preservation of the driver, the feeling of spirits hovering nearby. It was all too precise, too real, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A step back, my heart pounding. I knew now that this wasn't just a coincidence. I had seen this before it happened, and somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't the last time I would sense something like this. The connection I had feared all my life was real, and it wasn't going to let me go. As the reality of what had happened sank in, a chilling thought surfaced. The dream, the strange feeling that morning. Even the way my dog had stared at me, they all seemed connected to this accident. It was as if I had been shown the tragedy before it unfolded, like some kind of warning or message from beyond. A part of me resisted, not wanting to believe that my family's so-called gift had somehow chosen me, but I couldn't deny the unmistakable sequence of events. I'd spent my entire life trying to distance myself from anything supernatural, yet here it was, pushing its way into my reality. The signs were impossible to ignore. I had heard stories from my family about moments like this, and how my uncles saw things others couldn't, and how my mother sometimes felt things before they happened. I'd always dismissed their tales as exaggerations, but now, standing here, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The worst part was the feeling of entrapment, that I could never truly escape this presence that seemed to linger around me, waiting for a moment to reveal itself. I realized that, despite all my attempts to live a normal life, I was bound to this connection in a way I couldn't sever. I didn't want it, didn't want to sense these things or be drawn into their mysteries. But they were woven into my very existence, unrelenting, always lurking in the shadows of my mind. Walking away from the scene, I felt hollow and uneasy, as if I'd been marked by something beyond my control. I knew I'd carry this weight with me, the chilling awareness that there was a world just out of sight, one that seemed intent on reaching through and touching mine, whether I liked it or not.